Feel the real fear with us. Unsolved mysteries and horror stories.
Imagine finding out that the tragic suicide of your teenage daughter wasn't actually a suicide at all, but a calculated, cold-blooded murder by an ancient, flesh-eating entity. If you think Skinwalkers or Wendigos are terrifying, wait until you hear what's lurking in the remote mountains of Nepal. Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Horror Night. Before we dive deep into tonight's nightmare, I need to give you guys a quick heads up. This is Tilak Pishach, Part 2. Meaning this is the grand finale of this horrific saga. If I don't give you a little context right now, anyone who missed Part 1 is going to be super confused. So, if you haven't listened to the first episode yet, please go do that real quick. Otherwise, nothing tonight will really make sense. And trust me, this second half is way darker and a lot more heartbreaking. So, let's get right into it. Our friend Paul actually collected this story while traveling through the Elam district in Nepal. It's one of the 14 districts in the Koshi province. So, in the last episode, we talked about how a local man named Bishnu Sharpa and his wife Nirmala lost their daughter Ashu. She went out to pick vegetables and got snatched and killed by these entities known as the Tilak Pishach. Now, for those of you who don't know, think of the Tilak Pishach as ancient, shape-shifting demonic entities. Sort of like a demonic vampire. Supposedly, Ashu accidentally stepped on one of them, and that was her death sentence. But was that really why she had to die? When she first went missing, a Buddhist monk actually managed to rescue her. But the parents had another daughter, Ritu, and Ritu ended up tragically hanging herself. Just like that, this family only had 2 kids, and both were wiped from the face of the earth. Now, Nirmala's dad, the girl's grandpa, Lalu Lamchi, was actually a heavy-hitting Tantrik, basically a dark shaman who controlled the unseen world. But why did he walk away from that dark magic? That's exactly what we're uncovering tonight. Even though he found out about his granddaughter's situation a bit too late, he couldn't really use his powers to save them. And that guilt, it was eating him alive. Tonight, we're gonna find out how this whole nightmare ends. What happened to the family? What happened to the demons who slaughtered those girls? What was the final fate of Lalu, the dark shaman? And what happened to the devastated dad, Bishnu? Prepare yourselves, because this one is gonna give you literal chills. Losing both daughters completely broke Bishnu and Nirmala. They loved those girls more than anything in this world. They were mountain folks, living a really hard, grueling life, but they raised their kids with so much love and care. Coming home after back-breaking labor and just seeing their daughters' faces, it made all the exhaustion just fade away. And Ashu and Ritu loved their parents just as much. They'd always help out around the house and with their dad's work. Basically, they were a perfect, happy family until it all just collapsed. Within days, Nirmala started losing her mind. It wasn't constant at first, but the madness just kept creeping in. She'd sit all day on the dirt floor, just staring blankly out at the distant mountains. She completely stopped eating. The only time she consumed anything was if Bishnu literally forced food down her throat. It was like her soul had already left her body, and her will to live just evaporated. Bishnu, on the other hand, had to somehow pull it together. They were working-class people, living paycheck to paycheck. If he didn't work, they didn't eat. He had absolutely no choice but to go back to his old job at the tea garden. Nirmala would just sit at home all day. If you looked at her face, it looked like she was waiting for something. A long, agonizing wait that was never going to end. It was absolutely heartbreaking. Whenever Bishnu looked at her, he couldn't hold back his tears. They used to have such a beautiful life. And now, their only reasons for living were just gone. A few days passed like this. Then, one evening, Bishnu came home from the tea garden and found his wife lying lifeless on the floor. He called her name over and over, shaking her, but she didn't respond. When he checked on her, he realized she was gone. Nirmala had passed away. Bishnu was completely alone. No daughters, no wife. He was in such deep shock he couldn't even cry. He couldn't even scream. Honestly, what was the point of crying? The universe had stripped literally everything from him. He had no idea what to do. By then, it was getting completely dark outside. He stumbled out of the house, grabbed a couple of neighbors, and asked two of them to run and send word to his father-in-law, Lalu. Bishnu was basically going numb. He could barely move. His whole body felt paralyzed and incredibly heavy, like his limbs just refused to listen to his brain. He was forcing himself just to take a single step. The neighbors stepped up and started prepping for Nirmala's funeral. Right around dawn, Lalu showed up with the two messengers. Seeing his dead daughter absolutely crushed him. I mean, Nirmala was his only child. He just stood there, staring at her lifeless face. But the weird thing was, Lalu was completely calm. It almost looked like he knew this was going to happen. He leaned down, put his face right next to his dead daughter's ear, and whispered something into it. Then, he gently covered her face with a cloth. The next morning, the funeral was done. Afterward, Lalu went back to Bishnu's house. He spent a long time just pacing around the property, inspecting the perimeter. Then he went inside and stared into every single dark corner of the room, looking for something. Finally, he walked out and looked dead at Bishnu. "Listen to me, son," Lalu said. "There are things you need to know. You know how Ashu died, and you know how they brought her back. But when that monk rescued Ashu, a group of those Tilak Pishach demons started stalking your family. They weren't satisfied with just Ashu. On the day of her funeral, I told Nirmala to keep a close eye on your other daughter, Ritu, because once I realized these specific demons feed on the blood of unmarried virgins to get stronger, I knew they might come for Ritu next. I kept my own watch over her for a while, but I didn't see any red flags. So, eventually, I backed off, but behind the scenes, the son of the demon leader had already decided he was going to drink Ritu's blood. He ordered the other demons to back off, saying she was his prey. And then, he just waited for the perfect opening. You know Ritu was secretly dating that boy from the edge of the village, Gautam, right? They were deeply in love, and were actually planning to get married. When the demon found out about this, he spun this dark psychological web. He literally manipulated Gautam's parents into forcing Gautam to marry a completely different girl. Within days, Gautam knew he was acting against his own will, but he was under a spell. He couldn't control himself. When Ritu heard the news of Gautam's wedding, it broke her, and that gave the demon exactly what he wanted. Think about it. If Ritu had married Gautam, she wouldn't be an unmarried virgin anymore, and her blood would be useless to him. That's exactly why he sabotaged the wedding. But more importantly, With Gautam marrying someone else, it gave the demon the perfect cover story. Everyone would just assume Ritu killed herself out of heartbreak. That's what humans do. They believe the most logical lie. So, he waited for the right moment, drained her blood, and hung her body right here in her room. He knew that even if people dug into it, they'd blame Gautam. It was the ultimate two birds, one stone situation. And that's exactly how they murdered her. I found all of this out too late, Lalu said, his voice trembling slightly. They brutally murdered my two innocent granddaughters, and the grief drove my only daughter insane until her heart stopped. Honestly, I probably don't have much time left either, but I have some unfinished business. You cannot stay in this house anymore, Bishnu. I know you have memories here, but this place is a death trap. Exactly 7 days from today, you need to pack up and leave. You can leave sooner if you want, but before you walk out that door, take the exact same rope they used to hang Ritu and tie it into a tight knot around the front door. And never, ever come back. This house is permanently cursed. Nobody can ever live here again. Take whatever you need, but leave. I am going to trap and bury the entities that fed on this family, right here on this property. Leave within a week. If you ever need me, come find me at my place. I'm going. With that, Lalu turned around and started walking home. But right as he reached the edge of the property, he stopped and took one last look at the house. Bishnu noticed Lalu's eyes. They were completely bloodshot, practically glowing red, like they were going to burst from sheer rage. Lalu let out this heavy sigh, looking like his anger was physically ripping out of his body. He pointed a single finger at the house, made some sort of terrifying hexing motion, and then just walked away. Bishnu heard everything Lalu said, but he didn't say a single word back. He just wasn't in any state to talk. He just sat there, sobbing, thinking about his wife and kids. For a second, the pain was so agonizing he genuinely considered taking his own life. But he pulled himself out of that dark headspace. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that 3 of his favorite people in the world were just gone. What do I do now? How do I eat? How do I even live? What's the point? That's all he could think about. A day later, he decided to follow his father-in-law's advice. He packed a few essentials and told his neighbors he was leaving for good. Staying there just brought back too many haunting memories, so he decided to move far away. Exactly 7 days later, Bishnu walked away from the house, heading toward an unknown destination. He kept looking back, seeing the faces of his wife and kids in his mind. What a brutally tragic ending. He never imagined he'd have to leave his home like this, but before he left that cursed, memory-filled house, he didn't forget his father-in-law's instructions. He took the exact rope everyone thought Ritu used to hang herself, and he tied it tightly to the front door. So, he leaves. About a year passes. One day, Bishnu finally decides to go visit his father-in-law, Lalu. But when he walks into Lalu's house, he is absolutely shocked. Lalu's arm and one of his legs are completely broken and busted up. By the way, Nirmala's mom had passed away years ago, so Lalu was living all alone. Lalu looked surprised to see him. He called Bishnu over and said, "Son, it took you this long to remember me? I don't have anyone left in this world but you. I knew you'd come eventually, but I didn't think it'd take a whole year. Look, when I left your house a year ago, I told you my time was almost up. Look at me now. My arm and leg are destroyed. The clock is ticking. But I kept the promise I made to my daughter. When I looked at her dead body, I whispered in her ear that I would avenge them. And I did. I took brutal, ruthless revenge on the things that killed my girls. But in return, they aren't going to let me live either. Honestly, I don't even have any regrets. I did my job. Dead or alive, it doesn't matter to me anymore. Hearing this, Bishnu completely broke down. He hugged the old man and just cried his eyes out. And that's when Lalu finally started telling the story of his own life. And the things Lalu confessed? It completely blew Bishnu's mind. There was so much he didn't know. Lalu explained that most people have absolutely no idea who he really is. He has a past, a dark, terrifying past that he kept buried from the world. Ever since he was a kid, Lalu was fearless. Mountain blood has just built different courages practically in their DNA. He was an only child, so his parents spoiled him a bit. But from a very young age, he was deeply obsessed with the spiritual and occult world. And as he got older, that obsession just became overwhelming. He spent his time wandering the mountains, tracking down shamans, monks, and tantrics. Eventually, he found this one extremely dark tantric and begged to be his student. The tantric rejected him at first. But Lalu was stubborn. He annoyed the guy for days, until the tantric finally caved and took him in as an apprentice. But the training was messed up. The tantric started him off by making him collect the hair and blood of unmarried women. A little while later, his master upgraded the tasks. Lalu had to go find the body hair of people who had recently committed suicide. Now, the mountains aren't densely populated, so finding that was insanely hard. But the tantric always magically knew the exact locations and gave him directions. Because he was always out doing this weird macabre stuff, Lalu was barely ever home. And his parents got super suspicious. They actually hired people to spy on him. Eventually, his parents found out he was apprenticing under a dark mountain tantric. His dad was furious. He beat Lalu up and strictly forbade him from ever seeing that man again. But Lalu didn't care. He had already made up his mind that he was going to master the dark arts. That very night, he ran away from home, moved in with the tantric, and never looked back. One day, the tantric told him to go to a cremation ground and bring back the dirt from a fresh pyre, like a body that had just been burned. So, Lalu went out in the dead of night. Right as he grabbed the dirt and started heading back, this massive, monstrous dog blocked his path. Lalu had never seen a dog this huge in his life. He was a little freaked out at first, because the thing was growling and snarling like a demon. But it wasn't stepping any closer. That's when Lalu realized, I don't need to be scared of this thing. It's just trying to intimidate me. It can't actually touch me. So, he literally just ignored it, walked right past the hellhound, and made it back to his master. But as he was walking, he could hear heavy, thudding footsteps following right behind him. He didn't look back. He just kept walking. When he got back, the tantric looked at him and smirked. You really do have guts, Lalu. One morning, the tantric told him, we're doing a ritual tonight. Be ready. Late that night, the tantric drew a circle, placed Lalu inside it, and put a human skull right in the middle. He told Lalu to place his hands on the skull, close his eyes, and chant specific mantras. Lalu did exactly what he was told. The tantric stayed outside the circle. Lalu had no idea how long he sat there chanting, but suddenly, he felt a massive, invisible pair of hands shove him hard from behind. He fell forward, face planting into the dirt. When he scrambled and looked back, the Tantrik was just smiling at him. Lalu was super confused. The Tantrik walked over, pulled him up by his arm and said, "The entity I just attached to you is incredibly powerful. You're going to start doing small jobs now. You've finally earned the right to practice." For the next 40 days straight, the Tantrik drilled intense dark magic into his head. After the 40 days, the Tantrik told him, "You're ready for the big leagues now." But before they parted ways, the Tantrik gave him one final, chilling warning. "The magic you've learned today means your family line will never last. Everything you love in this life will be taken from you very quickly." Lalu didn't care. His ego was through the roof at that point. He felt like he had ultimate power, and he figured it was worth whatever the cost was. He didn't realize that was the exact day his life actually started falling apart. 6 months later, he finally went back to his parents' house. His parents were cold to him. They didn't love him the same way anymore. But Lalu didn't even care. All he cared about was becoming the greatest Tantrik ever. The hunger for power had completely consumed him. He started doing small magical favors for the locals, and his success rate was 100%. Word spread fast. Almost overnight, he became the most feared and respected dark shaman in the mountains. There was literally nothing he couldn't do. Losing wasn't even in his vocabulary anymore. If people needed help, he helped them. If they wanted to secretly put a black magic death curse on someone, he did that too. Slowly but surely, he started capturing different demonic entities and turning them into his personal slaves. He bound so many powerful demons to his will that eventually, every entity in the region was terrified of simply hearing his name. If he was working on a spell, no demon dared to interfere. He basically became the undisputed king of the unseen paranormal world in those mountains. But with all that power, his greed and arrogance just kept growing. Then, the curse hit. Just a little while later, both of his parents died within exactly 7 days of each other. Suddenly, Lalu felt really alone. He decided to get married to shake off the isolation. But for 7 years after his wedding, they couldn't have kids. He started panicking. Am I really cursed? He tried all his own dark magic, but absolutely nothing worked. Finally, after years of trying, they naturally had a baby girl Nirmala, Lalu's one and only child. He never had any other kids, and he spoiled Nirmala rotten. But when she was just 5 years old, Lalu's wife died. He never remarried. It was just him and Nirmala against the world. Because he was always dealing with dark spirits, he was incredibly paranoid and constantly used his bound demons to watch over her and keep her safe. One time, a woman came to him begging for help. Someone had put a vicious black magic curse on her husband. She said he was on death's door. Lalu agreed to take the case and told her to bring her husband to him. But the guy was so far gone he couldn't even stand up, let alone trek through the mountains. So, Lalu hiked over to their house. When he walked in, it was a literal nightmare. Lalu had seen some crazy stuff in his career, but nothing like this. The guy was practically a skeleton. Skin stretched tight over bones, no muscle left. He kept vomiting blood. But the most messed up part? His tongue was hanging completely out of his mouth, just dripping saliva everywhere. One look, and Lalu knew this wasn't standard black magic. A high-level demon was directly possessing this guy. Lalu told the wife to lay the guy down on the floor. The second Lalu's hand touched the man's body, the guy's tongue slowly slithered back into his mouth, like a normal person's. The wife said it had been hanging out like that for a straight week. The guy was in pure agony. Lalu drew a protective circle around him and started chanting. Nothing happened. He couldn't sense any entity in the room. He kept trying, but it was just a dead end. Finally, Lalu reached into his bag, pulled out a little bottle of special 5-herb-infused oil, and rubbed it under the guy's nose. Immediately, the man's body violently spasmed. Lalu instantly felt the shift in the room. The entity was finally here, right inside the man. Lalu looked down and demanded, "Who sent you? Why are you torturing this man?" The demon spoke through the guy's mouth, its voice completely twisted and unnatural. "What do you care who sent me? Your master knows who we are. I'm going to crush this man to death. 2 virgins were sacrificed to summon me for this hit. I'm under a blood contract. And if you try to stop me, I will kill you too." Hearing a demon threaten him made Lalu's blood boil. Demons normally ran terrified from him, and this thing had the audacity to threaten him to his face? He chanted a quick spell, pulled a handful of cursed blood-soaked dirt from his pouch, and shoved it directly into the possessed man's mouth. The man started thrashing wildly, screaming in pure agony. But within minutes, the screaming stopped. Right before the entity vanished, it forced one last chilling sentence out of the man's mouth. "You have a daughter, right? They aren't going to spare her." Right after that, a massive, pitch-black bat seemingly fell out of thin air and slammed onto the floor next to the man. It was dead. Lalu realized the bat was the demon. It hadn't actually been fully inside the man's body. It was hovering nearby, controlling him. When Lalu shoved that cursed dirt into the man's mouth, it acted like spiritual poison. It tracked back to the demon, killed it in midair, and it dropped dead as a bat right next to them. With the demon dead, the man finally stabilized. Lalu told the terrified wife, "He's fine now. Just give him some herbal medicine." Lalu picked up the dead bat and started his trek home. But as he carried it, the air around him felt incredibly heavy. He had done 1,000,000 exorcisms, but this was the first time he genuinely felt uneasy, especially with that final threat about his daughter. But eventually, he brushed it off. He buried the dead bat on the side of a mountain path and just went back to his normal life. As the years passed, his daughter Nirmala grew up. So, time goes on. Nirmala keeps growing up. Everything seems fine. But then, one night, deep in the mountains, a voice calls out from outside Lalu's house. It's pitch black outside. Who wanders the mountains at this hour? Lalu steps out and sees a man standing there in the shadows. The stranger looks at him and says, "Brother, I need you to do a job for me. I'll pay you whatever you want, but it has to be done." Lalu looks at him and asks, "What's the job?" The man doesn't hesitate. "I need you to put a death curse on someone. I need them dead." Now, in the local mountain dialect, a dark magic death curse is called a dieng. The man was desperate. He said he would pay anything, but this person needed to die quickly. Lalu tells him to come back in the morning, probably thinking the guy might change his mind. But the stranger wasn't playing around. He immediately pulled out a massive amount of cash, shoved it into Lalu's hands, and said, "Keep it. This is extremely urgent." Lalu asks for the target's name and what the man brought for the ritual. The stranger gives him the name and hands over a torn piece of the target's shirt. He says, "This is all I could get. No hair, no nails, just this fabric. You have to make it work with just the money I gave you." Lalu looks at the money, looks at the shirt, and says, "Fine, go, the job will be done." The next morning, Lalu summons his most loyal bound demons. He sends them out to gather intel on the target. A few hours later, the demons return, and the information they bring back completely shocks Lalu. The man he was hired to kill, the target of this death curse, was also a Tantrik. A powerful dark shaman. Lalu is stunned. A Tantrik taking a hit out on another Tantrik? He was torn. This was incredibly dangerous territory. But then, a dark, wicked thought crept into his mind. His arrogance, his sheer, unadulterated ego, began to take over. Lalu looked at the piece of shirt, smiled to himself, and thought, why not? Let's just do it. Let's test the absolute limits of my power, and that is where the terrifying origin of Lalu Lamchi's downfall begins. The pure arrogance that eventually brought a demonic curse upon his entire bloodline, leading to the horrific slaughter of his family by the Tilak Pishach. Taking down a dark sorcerer is never an easy job, and when your enemy is just as incredibly powerful as you are, you know the clash is going to be absolutely legendary. Lalu Lamchi knew this. So, he summoned his top 10, the most vicious, powerful, and loyal demons he had under his command. He sat down with them, and together, they meticulously plotted the perfect death curse to completely obliterate this rival sorcerer. That very same night, Lalu initiated the dark ritual. For the first time in his entire life, he didn't hold back. He unleashed about 90% of his total magical knowledge and raw power onto this single target. At that exact moment, he had absolutely zero idea of the catastrophic chain of events he was about to set into motion. He finished the ritual, thinking the job was done. But the very next day, his daughter Lalu Lamchi started feeling sick. Lalu immediately went to check on her. He scanned her for everything. He looked for invisible entities, signs of black magic, or any sort of paranormal attachments. Nothing. The coast was entirely clear on the supernatural front. So, he figured, maybe it was just a regular physical illness. He decided to treat her himself, using some traditional, homemade herbal remedies. But as the days dragged on, the young girl just kept getting sicker and sicker. Then, one night, things took a terrifying turn. Lalu fell asleep and had this incredibly vivid, horrific nightmare. In the dream, a massive, grotesque entity with 6 legs emerged from the shadows. This terrifying figure looked right at Lalu and spoke to him in a booming voice. It said, "Lalu, how could you possibly do this? You have brought this absolute disaster upon yourself. You are going to face the punishment for what you've just done." Lalu jolted awake, his heart pounding out of his chest. He tried to rationalize the whole thing. He told himself that when you spend your life doing this kind of dark magic, twisted nightmares are just part of the package. They are totally normal. Besides, he was getting older, and the immense stress of his daughter's mysterious illness was constantly weighing heavily on his mind. But he didn't want the terrifying consequences of his dark lifestyle to ever fall onto his innocent daughter. So, right then and there, he made a massive, life-altering decision. He was going to quit the dark arts. Completely and permanently. True to his word, right after that chilling dream, he completely shut down his magical practices. He stopped all the chanting, all the rituals, everything. But the past wasn't done with him. A few days later, those same 10 demons he had sent to do the job suddenly materialized right in front of him. They looked at him and delivered a message that chilled him to the absolute bone. They said, "Master, the one you cursed? He wasn't a human sorcerer. He is a leader of the Tilak demons. He was living high up in the mountains, perfectly disguised in a human form. Because of the incredible power of your curse, he has been brutally, terrifyingly injured. But he is not dead. Hearing this, Lalu's blood ran completely cold. The puzzle pieces violently slammed into place. He finally realized exactly who had given him that dark job the other night, and exactly which demon leader was pulling the strings from the shadows. It was all crystal clear now. You see, remember that woman who came to Lalu, begging him to save her husband? Well, in order to save that man's life, Lalu had to kill a dark entity. But he didn't just kill any random demon. He had slaughtered the son of the Tilak demon leader. So, to get his ultimate revenge, that exact demon leader disguised himself as a rival sorcerer. He came to Lalu and manipulated him into basically casting a massive, apocalyptic death curse on himself. The demon leader knew he couldn't just attack Lalu directly. Absolutely not. Lalu was a walking, breathing nightmare to every single dark entity in those mountains. They were terrified of him. So, the demon leader played it incredibly smart. He hired Lalu to do his own dirty work. And here is the absolute craziest part of it all. The target name, and that piece of clothing the demon leader handed to Lalu for the ritual, they actually belonged to Lalu himself. It was a torn piece of Lalu's very own old shirt, and a childhood name that only his dead parents knew. A name that even Lalu had completely forgotten over the years. No one had uttered that name since his parents passed away. When those 10 loyal demons went out to execute the curse, they instantly realized the target was their own master. But demons are bound by strict, unbreakable rules. They were Lalu's slaves, they couldn't just kill him. So instead, they took that incredibly dark curse, turned it right around, and blasted it straight back at the Tilak demon leader who had set up the trap. The leader was critically wounded, but because of the ironclad demonic contract, a curse must take a toll. They had to fulfill at least a fraction of the deal. So, to spare their master, they just barely placed a microscopic scratch on Lalu's daughter, and that tiny, almost invisible scratch was enough to make her severely, dangerously ill. In that very moment, Lalu realized a chilling truth. The Tilak demon leader was never going to stop. He would hunt Lalu's family until the end of time. Lalu immediately summoned his 10 bound demons. He broke their chains and set them free, but with one absolute non-negotiable condition. From this day forward, you are free. But hear me now. When I need you, when I call your names, you must return. The demons eagerly accepted the deal and vanished. Then, moving fast, Lalu cast heavy, impenetrable protective wards all around his home to keep his family perfectly safe. Shortly after, he married off his daughter, Lalu Lamchi, to a man named Bishnu Sherpa. Nirmala then packed her things and moved into Bishnu's house. Lalu didn't stop there. He also placed those same powerful magical wards all around Bishnu's house, making it a supernatural fortress. He thought they were finally safe. He thought it was over. But Lalu didn't realize one terrifying fact about demons. If they can't kick the front door down, they will always find a loophole. The Tilak demons figured out that Lalu's family made a modest living by foraging for wild mountain vegetables and selling them at the local market. Since they physically couldn't cross Lalu's magical barriers to hurt the family at home, they set a trap. A brilliant, sickening trap. Disguised as ordinary, everyday humans, These demons went down to the market. They approached the family and specifically ordered a massive batch of extremely rare, highly expensive vegetables. The catch? These vegetables didn't just grow anywhere. You could only find them deep inside the treacherous, uncharted parts of the mountains. And that exact area was the main stronghold of the Tilak demons. Blinded by the promise of a huge payout, Bishnu and his daughter Ashu Sherpa ventured deep into that dark, isolated forest to find those exact vegetables. And while Ashu was frantically foraging in the thick brush, she accidentally stepped on the foot of a Tilak demon. Now, let me be completely clear. This was nothing but a pathetic excuse, a calculated, evil setup. The very moment her foot touched him, they swarmed her, they captured her, and they brutally attacked her. By the time the horrific news finally reached Lalu, it was already too late. He was furious. He was just about to break his sacred vow. He was ready to dive right back into the dark arts and unleash absolute hell on those mountains. But then, he heard a miraculous rumor. A local Buddhist monk had actually managed to recover his granddaughter from the forest. A massive wave of relief washed over Lalu. He thought, thank God. She's safe. I don't have to go back to the darkness. He rushed as fast as his old legs could carry him to meet the monk. But when he arrived, the monk just looked at him with profound, heavy sadness in his eyes. He said, I rescued her, yes, but she cannot be saved. The Tilak demons have already dealt the fatal blow. I only brought her back so you could look at your granddaughter's face. One last time, a few days later, Lalu's precious granddaughter, Ashu, passed away. Right then and there, Lalu made a blood vow. He was going to wipe them from the face of the earth. He plunged straight back into his dark magic. But he was much older now. He didn't have that terrifying raw energy he used to possess. He needed time and immense focus to build up his power. And right in the middle of his intense, draining preparations, he was hit with another crushing blow. He found out his other granddaughter, Ritu Sherpa, had also been brutally murdered by the demons. The sheer, unimaginable weight of this double tragedy completely shattered his daughter Nirmala's mind. The grief consumed her entirely. She lost her grip on reality and died shortly after, completely insane. That was it. That was the absolute breaking point. Lalu couldn't hold back anymore. Ignoring his old age and ignoring the severe physical toll it would take on his fragile body, he poured every single ounce of his soul into planning the most horrifying, ruthless revenge imaginable. On the very day of Nirmala's tragic funeral, Lalu pulled Bishnu aside. He told him that in exactly 7 days, he must pack up and leave the house. And as he left, he had to take a very specific rope and tie it in a tight, firm knot on the front door. During those 7 long days, Lalu was nowhere to be found. He didn't stay at home. Instead, he journeyed deep into his old, forgotten sanctuary, summoning those 10 powerful, loyal demons once again. He looked them dead in the eye and demanded to know every single detail: what happened to his granddaughters, why they were targeted, and who gave the orders. While his demons scoured the mountains for answers, Lalu went to work on the dark ingredients. He collected graveyard dirt, the warm blood of a sacrificed pig, the blood of an innocent virgin, torn and shredded clothes stripped from a corpse, and rushing, muddy flash floodwater straight from the highest peaks of the mountains. Soon, his demons returned and spilled the terrifying truth. He already knew about Ritu. But now, he knew everything. The Tilak demons had drained the blood of both girls purely to inflict maximum psychological torture on him, driving his daughter to total madness. Ashu accidentally stepping on the demon in the forest? It wasn't an accident at all. It was a cold-blooded, meticulously planned setup. Lalu sat down with his inner circle of demons to map out his revenge, and a terrifyingly smart, highly powerful demon named Ram stepped forward with a brilliant strategy. Ram said, "Master, if we can somehow capture the Tilak leader's own son, our revenge is completely guaranteed. Through him, we can lure out every single demon that helped slaughter your granddaughters." Lalu narrowed his eyes, asking, "Those creatures are vicious, ruthless, and overwhelmingly powerful. How on earth do we capture the son?" Ram leaned in and explained, "You must perform a grueling 3-day ritual to weave a massive, inescapable illusion. You need to convince a young, unmarried virgin girl to sit completely alone in an isolated, dead silent spot for a specific window of time, and then send her home safely. The Tilak leader's son is utterly addicted to the scent of virgin blood. If he senses a pure, unmarried woman alone in the middle of nowhere, he won't be able to resist. That is our trap." Without wasting a second, Lalu set the plan into motion. He found a young, innocent girl and used his persuasive words to convince her to help him. He didn't dare tell her the horrific truth of what was coming. He just gently told her, "Listen, my child, I just need you to sit right here in this quiet spot for a little while. That is all. When I tell you, you will walk straight back home. And if you need me to, I will walk you all the way to your door." The poor girl had absolutely zero clue what kind of cosmic nightmare she was stepping into. In the rugged mountain terrain, completely isolated spots were everywhere. On the night of a pitch-black, chilling full moon, Lalu began the ritual. Ram had taught him ancient forbidden mantras, and Lalu chanted them on a loop, throwing heavy logs into a massive bonfire. The fire blazed higher and higher. The faster and louder he chanted, the wilder and more violent the flames grew. Day 1 passed. Nothing happened. Day 2 passed. Still nothing. Both days he kept the girl safe in her spot for the allotted time, just like he promised, and escorted her back home unharmed. But then came the third night. The trap sprang. Drawn by the irresistible scent, the ruthless, terrifying son of the Tilak demon leader materialized out of the shadows, approaching the girl. Ram instantly alerted Lalu. Before the creature even knew what hit him, Lalu ambushed him, overpowering the beast and dragging him back to his house. There, deep in the dark, suffocating dirt beneath his floorboards, Lalu buried him alive. Immediately, the interrogations began. Lalu stood over the buried creature, demanding the names of every single demon that had a hand in his granddaughter's murders. Broken and terrified, the son confessed everything. Armed with the names, Lalu chanted the dark mantras, calling out to those specific demons. Because they were bound by blood to the leader's son, they had no choice, they were forced to come. And the moment they stepped into his trap, Lalu unleashed pure fire. He burned them all down to ash and buried their burning remains deep in the earth. Now, if the Tilak demon leader somehow found out that his son was captured, he would immediately come down like an absolute storm to rescue him. But what did Lalu do? Using his mastery of the dark arts, Lalu wove a massive, impenetrable illusion, a veil so thick and dark that even the mighty Tilak leader couldn't see, couldn't sense, and had absolutely no idea where his son was actually being held. This was a massive golden opportunity for Lalu. Down in the dark, the demon leader's son kept glaring up at him, repeatedly hurling threats. He hissed, "If my family ever finds out about this, they are going to tear you into pieces. Old sorcerer. Time is running out. You better let me go right now." Lalu didn't even flinch. Whenever the creature spoke, all Lalu had to do was close his eyes, and the haunting, lifeless faces of his 2 dead granddaughters and his ruined daughter would flash right before his eyes. Meanwhile, Ram came to him with an urgent warning. He told Lalu that the Tilak leader was getting close, and an attack on the house was imminent. So, they had to lock down the perimeter. Following Ram's exact instructions, Lalu reinforced his entire house. He poured rushing mountain flash floodwater and innocent virgin's blood all around the outside boundaries, creating a toxic, glowing ring of protection. Right in the dead center of his house, he sacrificed a pig, chanted heavy forbidden protection spells over its severed head, and buried it deep beneath the dirt. The rule was absolute. No matter how terrifying, how ancient, or how powerful a demon was, nothing dark could ever cross that threshold. Locked safely inside, Lalu continued to brutally torture the demon leader's son. He knew he couldn't keep him trapped forever. He had to finish this, and he had to finish it soon. Every single night, as darkness fell, Lalu's entire house would violently shake from top to bottom, vibrating like a massive, terrifying earthquake. Then came that one fateful night. Lalu took the exact rope that his granddaughter Ritu had used to take her own life. He tied a piece of it tightly around the neck of a heavy glass bottle, trapping the demon's son inside. With the bottle clutched firmly in his hand, he stepped out into the freezing night, starting his walk toward Bishnu's house. Yes, Bishnu's house. The very house that had been completely abandoned, left empty ever since Bishnu fled. Lalu walked forward, carrying a heavy, suffocating mix of fear and cold, calculating terror in his chest. Could he actually pull this off? Could he keep the grim promise he made to his dead daughter? By the freezing hours of pre-dawn, he finally reached the desolate house. The exact rope that Bishnu had tied to the front door as a parting ritual was still hanging right there. Lalu carefully untied a piece of it. He pulled out the glass bottle holding the trapped son. The other piece of Ritu's suicide rope was already tied around its neck. And then, the final horror began. Lalu started slamming the glass bottle against the hard floor, over and over again, while violently stabbing into it with sharp, glittering needles. The atmosphere around him exploded. It felt like a hurricane of dark, chaotic energy was tearing the room apart. But not even a supernatural storm could stop him now. He was completely, utterly blinded by the raw, venomous ecstasy of absolute revenge. Sweat poured down his face in heavy drops, stinging his eyes. He had a strict rule to follow. He had to use exactly 57 needles, piercing the bottle one by one, and a single needle could only be used once. You could never use the same needle twice. Its dark enchantment would completely fail on the second try. With every single push of a needle, the demon trapped inside shrieked. It wasn't just a sound, it was a horrific, blood-curdling Gagan Bidari scream that pierced the heavy night air. The entire house seemed to groan under the weight of its agony. The night felt like it was stretching out forever, refusing to end. 57 needles. 57 agonizing stabs. As that final, 57th needle sank deep into the bottle, the screaming suddenly stopped. The entity went completely, heavily limp. In that chilling silence, Lalu knew the beast was dead. Without wasting a second, Lalu took the bottle and wrapped it tightly in the very piece of clothing Ritu had been wearing the day she died. He slathered the wrapped bundle in thick, foul-smelling animal fat, walked out to the center of Bishnu's house, and dug a deep hole. He buried the bottle deep in the earth, beneath the floorboards. At that exact second, there was no one happier on the entire face of the earth than Lalu Lamchi. The monsters who had coldly sucked the blood of his innocent granddaughters and driven his daughter to madness were now lying dead, crushed, and buried right here in their own home. He whispered to himself that if he hadn't chosen the path of a dark sorcerer, he never, ever could have tasted this sweet, devastating revenge. His entire life of dark practice had finally found its true purpose. As the first pale streaks of morning light began to break across the sky, Lalu turned around and started his journey back home. And just like that, a few days slipped by. Then came a night that changed everything. While Lalu was fast asleep in his bed, suddenly, an invisible, crushing force violently yanked him up into the air and slammed him hard against the floor. Crack! His arm and his leg shattered instantly. Deep, bleeding scratches tore across his skin from nowhere. Out of the darkness, a suffocating pitch-black shadow loomed right over his broken body, whispering a single sentence: "Prepare to die." And then, everything went black. When Lalu finally regained consciousness, his body was completely wrecked. He could barely move. Using his old knowledge, he tried to treat his broken bones and torn flesh with traditional herbal remedies, but some wounds run too deep. His arm and his leg never healed right. They stayed crippled. From that night on, peace left his life entirely. Every time darkness fell, he was plagued by the most horrific nightmares imaginable. His room always felt suffocatingly heavy, the air thick with dread, while the house shook violently at night like a constant, localized earthquake. He sat there in the dark, waiting, just waiting for them to come back and finish him off. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. Not even a little bit. He had done what he set out to do. He had hunted down the monsters who destroyed his family, and he had delivered a brutal, merciless payback. His revenge was complete. Now, it was simply time to pay the debt. Before Bishnu left forever, Lalu gave him one final solemn piece of advice. He looked right at him and said, "Take care of yourself. And listen to me carefully, never ever get married again. Keep chanting the protective mantras I taught you every single day. And remember this above all else. Never try to find me. Never come near me again. If you show your face to me, you will be walking straight into a death trap. This is the last time our paths will ever cross in this human life. Do not try to check on me up close. If you must, you can ask about my news from a far distance, but stay away. That is my final advice to you." With those chilling words ringing in his ears, Bishnu Sherpa walked away from Lalu that day and never looked back. He never found out if the old sorcerer somehow survived that final brutal onslaught, or if the dark entities finally dragged him down into the earth. Bishnu never returned to that cursed house, and he kept his promise. He never married. He lived out the rest of his long life entirely alone, until he finally passed away in the year 2014. And just like that, the tragic history of an entire family came to a dark, permanent end. For a long time, this horrifying tale was on everyone's lips across the Ilan district. As generations passed, the modern world moved on, and people forgot. But if you talk to the older folks who still live among those hills today, they remember. They still whisper about it in the dark. All right, listeners, that brings us to the terrifying conclusion of the Tilak demon saga. Such an intense, heartbreaking, and dark piece of history. If you haven't had a chance to hear part 1 yet, I highly recommend checking it out to get the full picture of how this entire nightmare began. I've left the link right down below in the description. A massive shout out, and thank you to Paul for sending in this incredible, bone-chilling story. If you guys enjoyed this episode and want to hear more dark true encounters, make sure to smash that like button, share it with a friend, and hit subscribe if you're new around here. Stay safe out there, try to stay positive, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.